I mentioned earlier that there was a real movement of blues revival in London in the period of the early 1960s. A lot of the groups that are involved here that I'm going to be talking about are not ones that really placed singles on the charts. And so this was the kind of thing that happened in London. You had to kind of know the people who were doing it. It was a kind of an underground scene among people who were blues enthusiasts. One important thing for us to keep in mind when we think about this London scene is that a lot of the blues records that these people were imitating were not readily available. In the United States, they had been released on independent labels, which already had distribution problems inside the United States, not to mention trying to get these records over to the UK. And so oftentimes you had to send away by mail order to get blues records. And when they came after some weeks' time and you unwrapped them and you were the one person who in town maybe, or one of very few people in town who actually had that record, and so people would get together and play these records for each other, kind of like record playing parties, because everybody had different records from the collection. That was a way, in absence of radio that would do that for you, that was a way you could find out about music that you didn't already own yourself. And so these turned into evenings where musicians faithfully reproduced the music mostly of Chicago blues. And so some of the most important musicians that would later play a part in the more blues-oriented British invasion, most notably the Rolling Stones, were part of these early blues sessions. They were led by Alexis Korner and Cyril Davies. The group was called Blues Incorporated, and they established blues nights at the Marquee Theatre and out in Ealing, which is a suburb of London. These blues nights were often on off nights. You know, if there was going to be nobody in the club on a Sunday night or a Wednesday night or something like that, you get a club owner to let your blues club, come in and have performances. These were mostly not big Friday and Saturday night kinds of events. But there was a real emphasis on recreating the Chicago electric blues of Chess Records, including imitating the vocal performances, including the harmonica performances, the tone of the guitar, the drums, the piano, all these kinds of things. When you listen to the recordings that are extant of these guys, Alexis Korner and Cyril Davies, if you didn't tell somebody that these were sort of maybe middle-class British guys wearing tweed coats and smoking pipes, you'd think for sure this had come out of a Chicago club sometime in the late 1950s. They are very, very faithful tributes to that. So you've got this whole generation of guys who are 20-something, 30-something, who are doing these tributes, maybe into their 40s, and then you have the young guys who are coming around, like Keith Richards and Mick Jagger and people like that, who are coming around to kind of watch, sitting in the front row, checking out what these guys are doing. In fact, Mick Jagger gets his first opportunity to sing when he fills in for the singer from this group, a guy by the name of Long John Baldry, who got an opportunity to appear on the BBC the night he was supposed to be singing with the Blues Incorporated. And so he took the gig at the BBC, and Mick Jagger filled in for him. And he knew the tunes because he'd been sitting there watching this unfold. And so this small scene of blues enthusiasts, almost like a kind of a London blues club kind of environment, is where a lot of these young musicians who would later go on to be in the Rolling Stones and the Yardbirds and groups like that, this is where they became familiar with the blues. Very different from the influence on the Beatles. The Beatles also heard a lot of music that was coming from America, but the way they got it was because, as I said before, Liverpool is a port city. The sailors that would go across to the US would buy bucket loads of records because they knew they could sell them for good money, almost like people do with eBay now. Would go over to the US and get those records and then bring them back to Liverpool and sell them to people. So in some ways, there was more American music available to the Beatles than in Liverpool than was available to these blues enthusiasts in London, because they had these sailors who were coming back, and people who worked in the maritime business coming back and selling them records. But the Beatles weren't so interested in blues. You look for like really good blues on Beatles records, not so much. They were more interested in the polished vocal, song-oriented kind of music. But the Rolling Stones and the rest of these guys, this blues club, these guys really cared about the Chicago electric blues. So having set the stage for that, let's talk in the next video about the Rolling Stones and the way they emerge in the UK and in the US.